It takes exactly one sentence to dismantle a person's dignity, and my mother-in-law chose to deliver hers in front of 80 people at my own rehearsal dinner. She thought she was lighting a fire under my reputation, but she didn't realize she was standing in a room made of her own career's kindling. She thought she was mocking a cheap barn. What she was actually doing was insulting the pride and joy of the man who signed her paychecks. Some people don't learn respect until it costs them their livelihood, and for Evelyn Ashford, that cost was delivered in a manila envelope exactly 14 days after she tried to bury my pride. My name is Maya. I'm 28, and 2 weeks ago at my rehearsal dinner, my mother-in-law stood up, clinked her champagne glass, and reduced my dream wedding to a budget disaster. She didn't whisper it, she didn't say it in private. She waited until the room was silent, until every eye was on her, and then she pointed her manicured finger at the rustic, historic rafters of the Heritage Barn and called it a trashy shed for people with no taste. 12 of those guests were her elitist book club friends from the most expensive zip codes in Virginia. 5 were her high society neighbors from Great Falls who measure success in square footage and car brands, and one of them, seated right next to my father, was my boss, Mr. Harrison. He's the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar real estate firm, and more importantly, he's the man who spent 5 years and $10 million restoring this shed as a historic preservation project. Evelyn didn't see him. She didn't see the way his jaw tightened, or the way he slowly set his wineglass down with a heavy, ominous clink. She was too busy basking in the laughter of her circle, enjoying the way my face burned under the dim Edison bulbs I spent hours hanging myself. She's always measured worth by the label on a suit, and to her, I was just a girl from a service-class family who had managed to snag her golden boy son, Ethan. I just hoped the guests brought their own bug spray, she laughed into the microphone, her voice echoing off the 200-year-old oak walls. Because when Ethan told me they were getting married in a barn, I thought he was joking. I didn't realize we were actually going to be sitting on haystacks and eating off paper plates in a place that smells like wet wood and failure. The room went ice cold. My father, a man whose hands are mapped with calluses for 40 years of honest labor, gripped the edge of the mahogany table until his knuckles turned white. Ethan reached for my hand under the tablecloth, his eyes pleading with me to let it go. I sat there with my chin up, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, and I watched my mother-in-law perform. She thought she was winning. She thought she was establishing the hierarchy for the rest of our lives. But in exactly 2 weeks, she would learn that you should never throw stones when you're standing in a house built by the person you're trying to crush. I've spent the last 5 years grinding my way up from an intern to a senior project manager at Harrison & Associates. It's one of the most respected commercial real estate firms in Virginia, and I didn't get there because of a family connection or a silver spoon. I got there because I'm the daughter of a man who spent 40 years as a master carpenter. My dad taught me that a building is only as good as its foundation, and that's a lesson I've applied to every part of my life. I'm proud of my roots. I'm proud of the calluses on my dad's hands and the night shifts I worked to pay for my own degree. I've never had a trust fund, and I've never pretended to be something I'm not. Then there's Ethan. He's a brilliant software engineer, the kind of guy who is as steady as a rock but still manages to look at me like I'm the only person in the room. I love him with everything I have. But being with Ethan meant dealing with the architect of his life, Evelyn Ashford. To Evelyn, life isn't something you live, it's something you curate. She doesn't see people, she sees social standing, zip codes, and net worth. She wanted a daughter-in-law who was a pedigreed socialite, someone she could showcase at her charity galas. Instead, she got me, someone who knows how to read a blueprint and isn't afraid to speak her mind. She saw my independence as a threat and my background as a stain on the Ashford family legacy. Before I get into the grit of how the wedding planning became a Cold War, I've got a quick favor to ask. If you've ever had to deal with someone who looked down on you just because you weren't high class enough for their standards, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Also, I love seeing how far these stories travel. Drop a comment with your location and let me know what time it is where you are. I read every single one of them. Now, looking back, the trouble didn't start with the venue. It started months ago with a simple lunch and a guest list that Evelyn decided to rewrite behind my back, convinced that my side of the family wasn't distinguished enough to be seen in public. I think the best way to understand the war that broke out at the Heritage Barn is to understand the two different worlds that collided to create it. In my world, things are built with sweat, calluses, and a deep respect for the materials you're working with. My dad, David, is a master carpenter who can tell the species of a tree just by the scent of the sawdust. He raised me on job sites, teaching me that if you don't get the foundation right, the rest of the house doesn't matter. He's a man of few words but absolute integrity. He didn't give me a trust fund, but he gave me a work ethic that became my superpower. I carried that ethic into Harrison and Associates. When I started as an intern, I was the first in and the last out. I didn't mind getting my boots muddy on a construction site or staying up until 3 a.m. to double-check the load-bearing calculations on a new project. Mr. Harrison, the CEO, noticed that. He's a self-made billionaire who hates fluff as much as I do. He became my mentor, eventually promoting me to senior project manager because he knew that when I gave him a timeline, it was as solid as concrete. I've managed multi-million-dollar renovations and historical preservation projects that would make most socialites' heads spin. I was proud of my life. I was making $140,000 a year, owned my own condo in Arlington, and knew I had earned every single inch of my success.
Then I met Ethan. We met at a charity 5K run. I was there to support a local youth center, and he was there because he's a genuinely good person who likes to help. He's a software engineer who talks about clean code the same way my dad talks about clean joints and cabinetry. He was different from the guys I grew up with, but he had that same steady, quiet strength. For the first 6 months, everything was a dream. He didn't care that my dad was a carpenter. He thought it was cool that I could fix a leaky faucet faster than he could. But then came the day I met Evelyn Ashford. Ethan's family home in Great Falls is the kind of house that feels like a museum where you're not allowed to touch anything. It's all white marble, original oil paintings of ancestors who probably never did a day's work in their lives, and a silence that feels heavy with judgment. Evelyn met me at the door wearing a silk blouse and a pearl brooch that looked like it cost more than my first car. She didn't hug me. She offered a hand that was so thin and cold it felt like holding a porcelain doll. "So, Maya," she said within 20 minutes of our first dinner, her eyes scanning my outfit, a simple but professional blazer I'd worn from the office. "Ethan tells me you work in construction. Is that like interior design, or do you pick out the tile for bathrooms?" I smiled, the same calm smile I use when a contractor is trying to overcharge me for lumber. "Actually, Evelyn, I'm a senior project manager. I oversee the structural integrity, budgeting, and execution of large-scale commercial developments. It's less about picking tiles and more about making sure the building doesn't fall down." She tilted her head, the way you'd look at a curious insect. "Interesting. A bit masculine for a girl like you, don't you think? I always imagined Ethan with someone in a more refined field, perhaps law or the arts." She never explicitly said, "You aren't good enough," but she didn't have to. It was in the way she'd ask if my father's business was doing well, emphasizing the word business like it was a cute hobby. It was in the way she'd introduce me to her friends as Ethan's little worker bee. She had this habit of smoothing her skirt every time I mentioned a project I was proud of, a subtle gesture that told me she was literally trying to brush away the reality of my success. The real trouble started about a year into our relationship when Evelyn began her campaign to improve me. She'd leave magazines on the coffee table about the proper way to host a gala or heritage families of Virginia. She even tried to set Ethan up with a girl named Sloane, the daughter of one of her book club friends whose family had owned land in Fairfax since the 1800s. She'd invite Sloane to dinners when I was working late, telling Ethan that Sloane understood the pressures of their social circle in a way I never could. I didn't lose my temper. I didn't scream. Instead, I did what my career had trained me to do. I started a log. In a small digital folder on my phone, I documented the comments, the dates, and the subtle ways she tried to undermine my relationship. Professional habit. If you're going to handle a crisis, you need data. Entry number 14, October 12th. Evelyn asked if my mother, who is a retired schoolteacher, found it difficult to adjust to people with real education. Entry number 39, January 5th. Evelyn told Ethan in the kitchen that Maya's background is a service class background, Marcus. She will always be looking for a way to climb, and you are just the latter. Ethan tried to defend me. He really did. Mom, she's brilliant. She's respected in her field. Mr. Harrison treats her like a daughter, he'd say. But to Evelyn, a boss's respect was nothing compared to a family's legacy. She viewed my job at Harrison and Associates as a blue-collar management position, something that provided a paycheck but zero prestige. She had no idea that the man she was dismissing, my boss, was the very person she spent her weekends trying to impress at country club events. When Ethan proposed, Evelyn's first reaction wasn't, "I'm so happy for you." It was, "I suppose we'll have to find a way to make the guest list look balanced." She was terrified that my side of the family, the men with rough hands and the women who wore dresses from department stores, would embarrass her in front of her real friends. She didn't know that she was the one who was about to be embarrassed. She didn't know that every time she mocked my cheap taste or my service class family, she was building a case against herself. And she definitely didn't know that the cheap barn I had chosen for the wedding was the crown jewel of my boss's personal collection. To her, the Heritage Barn was just a drafty shed. To me, it was a masterpiece of 19th century engineering that my firm had spent 3 years restoring to its former glory. It had hand-hewn oak beams, original stone foundations, and a massive loft that looked out over the blue-tinged hills of the valley. It was breathtaking. When I showed the photos to Ethan, he loved it. He said it looks like a place that will still be standing in 100 years, just like us. We booked it that same week. We didn't tell Evelyn immediately, which in hindsight was like trying to hide a storm from a weather satellite. The explosion happened on a Sunday afternoon during one of her mandatory family brunches. I had brought the brochures and the contract to show her, thinking that maybe, just maybe, she would appreciate the craftsmanship. Evelyn didn't even touch the brochure. She looked at the cover, a beautiful shot of the barn illuminated by sunset, and she actually recoiled. She dropped her silver fork onto her china plate with a sharp clank that silenced the entire room. "A barn, Maya?" she asked, her voice dangerously thin. "You want to invite the directors of my husband's foundation and the board of the Historical Society to a barn? Do you have any idea how that looks?" "It's a historical restoration project, Evelyn," I explained calmly. "It has more structural integrity and history than any hotel ballroom in the state." "It's a shed for livestock," she snapped. "I spent 20 years building a reputation in this town, and I will not have it dismantled by a girl who thinks rustic is a substitute for refined. People will think Ethan couldn't afford anything better. They'll think your family's limitations have finally rubbed off on him." Ethan tried to step in. "Mom, it's our choice. We aren't looking for a ballroom. We want something that feels like home." Evelyn ignored him completely, her eyes locked on mine. "I've already spoken to the management at the St. Regis. They have an opening on your date. It's expensive, yes, but it's an Ashford wedding. I will pay the difference. We will move the booking tomorrow." "No," I said. It was one syllable, but it felt like a gunshot.
The booking stays where it is. We aren't moving to a hotel. The Heritage Barn is where we are getting married. That was the moment the passive-aggressive war officially began. Evelyn didn't scream anymore. She became a ghost in my planning process, haunting every decision with subtle, poisonous notes. 2 days later, I started getting calls from my guests, people from Ethan's side of the family. Maya, we're so sorry to hear the barn was condemned. A recitation of one of his aunts told me over the phone. Condemned? What are you talking about? I asked. Oh, Evelyn sent an email. She said the structural wood was rotting and that the plumbing wouldn't be finished in time. She told everyone to keep their schedules open for a venue correction update. My blood boiled. She was literally sabotaging my guest list. I had to spend 3 nights calling every single person on the list to reassure them that the venue was not only safe, but spectacular. But Evelyn wasn't done. She started calling my vendors behind my back. The florist called me, confused. Maya, a woman claiming to be the groom's mother, called and tried to change your order from wildflowers and eucalyptus to white lilies and crystal pedestals. She said you had budget issues and that she was taking over the payments. Then the caterer called. She tried to cancel the barbecue menu, Maya. She told us it was unfit for human consumption and demanded a 5-course French service. She even offered us a bribe to just forget the original contract. Every time I confronted her, she'd give me that same porcelain smile. I'm just helping, dear. You're clearly overwhelmed. A girl from your background shouldn't be expected to know how to host an event of this caliber. I'm just trying to save you from embarrassing yourself. The most frustrating part was the way she talked about the cheapness of the venue. She assumed that because it wasn't a gold-leafed ballroom, it was a bargain bin choice. She kept referring to it in her book club group chats as the plywood project. She had no idea that the plywood she was mocking was actually reclaimed 200-year-old chestnut wood that cost more per square foot than her entire marble kitchen. But the worst blow came 10 days before the rehearsal dinner. I found out through a neighbor that Evelyn had sent out a secret guide to the wedding in her elite circle. In it, she warned them to wear outdoor-only shoes because the floor was unfinished dirt and to eat a full meal beforehand because the food would be fairground quality. She was intentionally painting a picture of a poverty-stricken, low-class event to her high society friends. She wanted them to walk into my wedding with their noses already turned up. She wanted them to look at my father, my friends, and my choice of venue and see exactly what she had told them: failure. I sat in my office at Harrison and Associates, staring at a copy of that secret guide. I felt a wave of anger so strong I could barely breathe. But then I looked at the letterhead on my desk. I looked at the floor plans for the Heritage Barn restoration that Mr. Harrison had signed personally. Mr. Harrison walked past my office and noticed the expression on my face. "Tough project, Maya?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. "You have no idea, sir," I replied, tucking the guide away. "Well, remember what I told you. Never let the noise of the construction distract you from the blueprint. The building will speak for itself once it's finished." He was right. I decided right then that I wouldn't fight Evelyn on her level. I wouldn't send counter emails. I wouldn't argue at dinner. I would let the cheap barn speak for itself. I would let her walk right into the trap of her own arrogance. She thought she was mocking a shed. She didn't realize she was mocking a billionaire's passion project in front of the billionaire himself. The stage was set, the rehearsal dinner was approaching, and Evelyn Ashford was about to perform the lead role in a tragedy she had written for me but would ultimately star in herself. The night of the rehearsal dinner arrived with a crisp Virginia breeze and a sunset that turned the sky into a canvas of burnt orange and deep violet. The Heritage Barn looked like something out of a dream. I had spent the entire morning working with the decorators, ensuring that the warm glow of the fairy lights complemented the centuries-old oak beams. To me, it was a cathedral of history. To my father, it was a masterpiece of joinery. But to Evelyn Ashford, as she stepped out of her black town car, it was a crime scene of bad taste. She walked in with her chin tilted so high she probably couldn't see the ground. She was wearing a designer's silk dress that likely cost more than the entire catering budget, clutching her pearls as if the very air of the barn might stain them. Beside her, Garrett, Ethan's father, followed like a silent shadow, his eyes fixed on his shoes. Behind them was a trail of Evelyn's friends, the Great Falls elite, who whispered behind their hands the moment they crossed the threshold. "Oh, look at the charm," one of them snickered, pointing at a vintage milk crate I'd used to hold the programs. "It's very authentic," another replied, the sarcasm dripping like acid. I stood by the entrance, Ethan's hand firmly in mine. "Don't let them get to you," he whispered. "It looks beautiful, Maya, truly." "I know it does," I said, and I meant it. The dinner began at a long mahogany table that Mr. Harrison had personally commissioned for the space. I had arranged the seating carefully. I placed my father at one end, the man who built things, and Mr. Harrison at the center, the man who owned them. Mr. Harrison was dressed in a simple, high-quality linen suit, looking every bit the relaxed billionaire. He loved this barn. He had told me once that the smell of old wood was the only thing that kept him grounded in a world of digital numbers and glass towers.
Evelyn, of course, sat at the head of the table, positioning herself as the night's self-appointed judge and jury. For the first hour, she was polite in that sharp, conditional way that makes you feel like you're standing on thin ice. She complimented the wine, but made sure it mentioned it wasn't a vintage she recognized. She smiled at my father, then immediately asked if he found the rustic plumbing in the barn to be up to code. But then the champagne was poured, and that's when the filters came off. Evelyn stood up, her glass clinking against a silver spoon. The room went quiet. My heart did a slow, heady roll in my chest. I looked at Mr. Harrison. He was leaning back, watching her with a neutral, observant expression. "I'd like to say a few words," Evelyn began, her voice projecting with the practiced ease of someone who believes their opinion is the only one that matters. "Ethan, my darling boy, you have always had a heart for the underdog. Even as a child, you'd bring home the scruffiest stray cats and broken toys." A few of her friends chuckled. Ethan's grip on my hand tightened until it hurt. "But I have to be honest with our friends tonight. I tried to save this wedding. I offered the St. Regis. I offered a venue that actually had a floor made of something other than reclaimed splinters." She pointed a manicured finger at the ceiling, at the very beams Mr. Harrison had spent years sourcing from an 18th century mill. "I've spent 20 years curating a reputation for this family, and it breaks my heart to see Ethan's big day hosted in a place that smells like wet hay and failed ambitions. I suppose when you come from a background where a barn is a step up, you don't realize how embarrassing this looks to people of actual standing." The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was heavy. It was the kind of silence that rings in your ears. My father's face was a mask of stoic pain. He looked at his plate, his large, calloused hands resting on the white linen. I felt a surge of rage so hot, I thought I might actually stand up and scream. But then I saw Mr. Harrison. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed, in a way that was far more terrifying. He set his glass down. The sound of the crystal hitting the wood was like a gavel. "Mrs. Ashford," Mr. Harrison said, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the room. Evelyn blinked, finally noticing the man sitting across from her. "Oh, yes? I didn't catch your name, dear. Are you with the bride's construction crew?" My breath hitched. I watched the color drain from Ethan's face. He knew who Mr. Harrison was. He knew that the man his mother had just insulted was the CEO of the company she had been bragging about joining just last week. "My name is Arthur Harrison," he said, standing up slowly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "And I happen to be the man who spent 5 years restoring this shed. I also happen to be Maya's employer and the man whose firm just acquired the agency where you work as a senior consultant, Evelyn." The room didn't just go cold, it froze. Evelyn's glass wobbled in her hand. The Great Falls elite suddenly looked very interested in their dessert spoons.
I've always said that you can tell a person's character by how they treat a building they think is beneath them. This barn was built by hand, with integrity and sweat, much like the woman my project manager is. It's a shame you spent so much time looking at the dirt that you missed the craftsmanship. But don't worry, Evelyn. We'll have plenty of time to discuss standing and reputation when you come into my office on Monday. He turned to me and smiled, a genuine, warm smile. Maya, the venue is perfect. The bride is even better. Enjoy your night. He sat down and went back to his dinner, as if he hadn't just dismantled a woman's entire social standing in 60 seconds. Evelyn sat down, her face the color of ash. She didn't say another word for the rest of the night. She had spent months trying to bury me, but in her arrogance, she had forgotten to check whose ground she was standing on. The morning of my wedding didn't start with the frantic energy I had expected. Instead, there was a strange, crystalline calm. I woke up at 6 a.m. in my childhood bedroom, the smell of my dad's coffee drifting up the stairs, and for the first time in months, the weight of Evelyn's judgment felt light. After what happened at the rehearsal dinner, after Mr. Harrison had effectively pulled the rug out from under her, I expected a storm. I expected her to call Ethan screaming, or to try and cancel the flowers, or to claim a sudden dramatic illness. But when I arrived at the Heritage Barn at 9 a.m. to get ready, the only thing waiting for me was silence. Evelyn was there, of course. She arrived in a slate gray dress that looked more like she was attending a corporate takeover than her only son's wedding. She didn't offer a hug. She didn't offer a congratulations. She sat in the corner of the bridal suite, her eyes tracking every movement of the hair and makeup team, her mouth a thin, rigid line. She looked like a woman who had been forced to swallow a bitter pill and was still trying to decide if she should spit it out or act like she enjoyed the taste. I didn't give her the satisfaction of an apology or an explanation. I moved through the morning with a focus that surprised even me. When I put on my dress, a simple ivory A-line that flowed like water, I looked in the mirror and didn't see the service-class girl Evelyn tried to make me believe I was. I saw a woman who had built her own life floor by floor. The ceremony was held just as the sun began to dip behind the Blue Ridge Mountains. The cheap barn, as Evelyn had called it, was transformed. The 200-year-old chestnut beams glowed under the amber lights, and the scent of wildflowers filled the air. As I walked down the aisle on my father's arm, I saw the faces of our guests. They weren't looking for paper plates or haystacks. They were looking at the craftsmanship of the space, whispering about the history of the walls, and marveling at the soul of the venue. I looked at Ethan. He was standing at the altar, and for the first time, he wasn't looking towards his mother for approval. He was looking at me with a pride so fierce it made my breath hitch. When we exchanged our vows, his voice was steady, a promise made of iron and oak.
At the reception, the narrative completely shifted. Evelyn's Great Falls elite friends, the same ones who had snickered the night before, were now lining up to talk to Mr. Harrison. I watched from the head table as one of them complimented the extraordinary restoration of the barn. "It's just so authentic," she gushed, unaware that Evelyn was standing 3 feet away, clutching her wine glass like a lifeline. "Arthur tells me Maya was the project lead on the final phase. What a talented daughter-in-law you have, Evelyn." Evelyn's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Yes," she managed, her voice tight. "She's very industrious." Throughout the night, I felt Ethan's hand on mine. He didn't leave my side. Every time his mother tried to pull him away for a family-only photo that excluded me, he simply pulled me closer and said, "Maya is the family mom." I had won the battle of the wedding day, not by shouting, but simply by being. I had maintained my grace while Evelyn's mask was slowly cracking. She thought the cheap barn would be my downfall, but as I looked around at the laughter and the warmth, I realized it was the foundation of her own undoing. She was still the senior consultant, and Mr. Harrison was still her boss. And in exactly 14 days, the grace I showed today would be replaced by the cold reality of a termination letter she never saw coming. The 2 weeks following the wedding were the quietest of my life, but it was the kind of silence that happens before a massive tectonic shift. Ethan and I had spent a few days in a small cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains. No phones, no social media, and definitely no Evelyn. But on Monday morning, the real world came knocking, and it brought a manila envelope with it.
I walked into Harrison and Associates at 8 a.m. The atmosphere was electric. We were in the final stages of a massive merger with a boutique PR and consulting firm that handled high-end luxury brands, the very firm where Evelyn worked as a senior consultant. To her, I was a girl who played with dirt and blueprints. She had no idea that for the last 6 months, I had been the lead analyst on the team evaluating her company's human capital. I had seen her performance reviews. I had seen the complaints about her exclusionary management style. And more importantly, I had seen her salary and the lack of results that justified it. At 10 a.m., the lobby doors hissed open. I was standing by the glass-walled conference room when I saw her. Evelyn Ashford walked in like she owned the building. She was wearing a cream-colored power suit, her signature pearls, and an expression of supreme confidence. She was here for the onboarding and integration meeting. She stopped at the reception desk, not even looking at the young girl behind the counter. "I'm here to see Arthur Harrison," she said, her voice dripping with that familiar Ashford authority. "He's expecting me." "Do you have an appointment, ma'am?" the receptionist asked. "I am a senior consultant with the incoming firm. I don't need an appointment to see my new CEO. That's when I stepped out. "Actually, Evelyn, everyone needs an appointment today. We are on a very tight schedule." Evelyn froze. She turned toward me, her eyes scanning my professional attire, a tailored charcoal suit and a watch that Mr. Harrison had given me for my 5-year anniversary with the firm. For a second, the mask slipped. "Maya, what are you doing here? Did you get a job in the mailroom?" I didn't flinch. I didn't even get angry. I just smiled the way a predator smiles when the prey walks into the trap. "I'm the senior project manager and lead advisor on this merger, Evelyn. My office is on the top floor. Yours, however, isn't in this building yet." Before she could process that, the heavy oak door to Mr. Harrison's private office opened. "Maya, is she here?" Mr. Harrison called out. He stepped into the lobby, his face a mask of cold professionalism. He didn't look like the relaxed man in the linen suit at the barn. He looked like the billionaire CEO who had built an empire on integrity. "Mrs. Ashford," Mr. Harrison said, his voice echoing in the silent lobby, "step into my office, now." Evelyn's confidence didn't break. It shifted into a desperate, oily kind of charm. "Arthur, so good to see you again. I'm so glad we can put that little misunderstanding at the barn behind. Weddings are so stressful, aren't they? People say things they don't mean." We walked into the office. Mr. Harrison didn't sit behind his desk. He stood by the window, looking out at the city skyline. I sat in one of the leather chairs, notepad ready. Evelyn sat across from me, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her designer bag. "I watched the video of your toast, Evelyn," Mr. Harrison began, his voice low and dangerous. "I watched it several times, and I also spoke to the caterer and the florist." Evelyn's face went from pale to a sickly shade of gray. "Arthur, that was a private family matter." "No," he interrupted, turning to face her. "When you use your position and my firm's name to try and bully vendors to change contracts, it becomes a professional matter. When you insult the craftsmanship of a project that represents this firm's legacy, it becomes a personal matter. But most importantly, when you show that you lack the basic character to treat people with respect simply because you think they are beneath you, it becomes a liability." He picked up a manila envelope from his desk, the same one I had seen in my mind's eye for weeks. He slid it across the mahogany surface. "The merger is finalized as of 9 a.m. this morning. As the new owner of your agency, I've decided to move in a different direction. Your role is redundant. Your consulting style is incompatible with Harrison and Associates. This is your termination letter, effective immediately." Evelyn stared at the envelope like it was a coiled snake. "You're firing me because of a wedding toast? You can't do that. I have a contract. I have standing. You have a severance package that is quite generous considering the circumstances, but you will leave this building now. Maya will escort you to the exit." Evelyn turned to me, her eyes wild, her mouth opening and closing. "Maya, talk to him. You're family now. You can't let him do this to Ethan's mother. Think about the reputation. Think about the scandal." I walked up in the door. The reputation of this family is exactly why we're doing this, Evelyn. You spent months telling me that I didn't have the standing to be in Ashford, but standing isn't about the name. It's about the work. It's about the way you treat people when you think they can't do anything for you. You were right about one thing, though. That barn wasn't cheap. It was priceless. And today, your arrogance just cost you everything. I walked her through the lobby, past the same reception desk where she had been so rude just 20 minutes ago. Everyone was watching. The woman who had curated her entire life around status was being walked out of a building by the girl she tried to bury. She didn't say a word until we reached the glass doors. "Ethan will never forgive you for this," she hissed.
Ethan already knows, I replied. He's the one who found the deleted emails you sent to the caterer from the family computer. He's waiting for you at home, Evelyn, and I think it's time you finally had a real conversation with your son. When Evelyn left the building, she didn't just leave a job, she left behind the carefully constructed myth of her own superiority. She drove straight to her home in Great Falls, likely preparing a speech for Ethan, a way to twist the narrative one last time. But when she walked through her front door, she didn't find a sympathetic son. She found Ethan sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of printed emails, the ones he had recovered from the family computer's trash folder. "Ethan, darling, you won't believe what that girl and her boss did," she started, her voice already trembling with practiced grief. "I know what they did, Mom. And I know what you did. I saw the emails to the caterer. I saw the messages you sent to the florist trying to sabotage our contracts. I heard the recording Mr. Harrison made of your toast." Evelyn stopped. The victim mask she had worn for 30 years finally shattered. For the first time, she had no rebuttal, no witty remark about standards or legacy. "I did it for you," she whispered, the last refuge of a controlling parent. "No," Ethan replied, standing up. "You did it for your own pride. You were so busy looking for a cheap venue that you missed the fact that you were the only thing in that room that lacked value. Maya built her own life. She built that barn. You just try to tear things down to make yourself feel tall. Until you can respect my wife and respect the work people like her and her father do, don't call me. We need space, Mom. Real space." That was the last time we spoke to Evelyn for months. She moved to a smaller place a few towns over. The high society friends she had tried so hard to impress, they moved on to the next person with a bigger house and a better wine list. Status is a fair weather friend. But dignity, the kind my father has, the kind Maya has, is a permanent resident. Looking back, that cheap barn was the best thing that ever happened to us. It wasn't just a place to say, "I do." It was a filter. It filtered out the people who measure worth by a price tag and kept the ones who understand that a foundation made of integrity is the only thing that will ever truly hold up a roof. My father still works with his hands. Mr. Harrison still visits the barn to smell the old wood and stay grounded. And me? I'm still a senior project manager. But now when I walk into a room, I don't check to see if I belong. I know I do, because I'm the one who built it. If there is one thing I've learned from this entire journey, it's this. Never let someone who has never laid a single brick tell you how to build your house. Your worth isn't determined by the zip code you live in or the labels you wear. It's determined by the way you treat people when you think they can't do anything for you. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it reminded you to stand tall in your own truth, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Remember, your boundaries are non-negotiable, and your dignity is priceless. I'm Maya, and this was my story. I'll see you in the next one.